Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Vocus webinar, Insider Secrets to the Perfect Pitch. I'm Natalia Dickey, Director of Product Management at Vocus, and your moderator for today. During today's webinar with Batt H, we're going to get an insider's look at how to craft successful pitches. So how to best connect with reporters to earn their trust, how to avoid those common misconceptions that can really kill your pitch, and ultimately how to earn coverage in top publications by learning when and what to pitch. So before I introduce Batt, we do have a few quick housekeeping points. So questions. Anybody has questions, there will be a moderated Q&A at the end of this webinar, so please feel free to use the Questions tab on your webinar panel to submit those anytime throughout the webinar today. If you want to download the slides, you can click the Download Slides PDF link that's in the box titled Want to Learn More at the bottom of your audience console. And if you're on Twitter today and want to tweet about this webinar, please use the Vocus Webinar hashtag. That's one word. Or you could also use the tweet box at the top of the webinar console. Also, the top Vocus webinar tweets are going to receive a Vocus prize pack in the mail, and we'll be revealing those winners on Twitter shortly after the webinar. So now let me introduce our speaker. Batt H is a former CBS News executive with over 30 years of experience in the news industry. He currently serves as a consultant, helping companies develop their message and raise their public personas. Batt is also the creator of Inside Media, an online course for entrepreneurs. So with that, let me turn it over to Batt. Welcome.
Hey, and thank you so much. And I just want to say at the top, I am so glad to be here today and thankful to Vocus for inviting me. And I want to thank each and every one of you who are taking time from your busy day to listen a little bit and hopefully leave with useful information and maybe a different perspective. I've seen over time so many other people, professionals and with great credentials, who offer useful tips on various parts of PR and marketing on Vocus and through Vocus and the programs that they offer. But since we're talking about television, before we get started, this commercial announcement. For those of you who are attending and listening today, we're giving today's attendees a chance to win a free pass to Inside Media, which is several hours of insider tips that goes beyond what we're talking about today. All you need to do is look for the Q&A tab on the screen in the console and send over your email address. We'll select a winner at random and announce at the end of the webinar. So back to our regularly scheduled programming. I'm now working, as was mentioned, as a media consultant and as an author writing novels. Today what I hope to offer is a look at the receiving side of all of the PR efforts that a lot of you folks out there are involved in, of the pitches and the releases that we all send from the perspective of the executives and the producers that we're sending them to. Because I think it's very important, if you want to be successful with them, that you understand a little bit about their world, my former world, and the pressures that they face and how they see you. If I could, I'd recommend that every person in PR either consider becoming a reporter for a day or finding a reporter that you know and spending a day observing them in their shoes, so to speak. It would really help give you that reverse perspective. If you ever connect with a producer, see if maybe someday you can, and ask if they'll let you spend part of a day with them. It will change the way that you go about your business. Hopefully, in this short time ahead, I can give you a little bit of an idea of what that world is like. I was fortunate to spend a couple of decades working for CBS News, finally ending up as an executive producer. The EP is pretty much where the buck stops for a broadcast. It's your show. For me, it was 2 hours a day of network television. I was very fortunate in my last posting to be the executive producer of the CBS Early Show. It was the job that I'd always wanted. I'd had plenty of editorial experience, but I was glad that someone finally gave me enough business credibility to put what, in essence, was a $250 million enterprise into my hands. A network morning show is truly the greatest show on earth. It's and that circus connection is intended. When I first started planning and trading some notes on this presentation, I called it Blood, Sex, Clowns, and Monkeys because, in part or whole, That's what it is. It pretty much covers the range of experience in the business. In this case, morning television, it's more accurate than you can imagine. And one reason why morning television is a great target for your potential placement. Just one example of the range of stories or events. On the morning of September 11, 2001, my broadcast was in the middle of a cooking segment at 8:40 something that morning. I was pretty much tuned out. I had my feet up on the console, just kind of watching and half dozing. That's when a plane flew into the World Trade Center, and I made the call that began what we call a special report that began the coverage of the attack on America. And I'll always remember that morning and the perspective of how news and a broadcast and our lives can all change in an instant. And the instant nature and change of news is something that becomes critical as we talk forward in this process today. Being aware of that immediacy is what will give you a tremendous advantage in making your placements hit. Okay, so here's a map of Manhattan. And I'm not really going to make this a geography class, but there's a perspective here that I want to try to make. There's a river that separates Manhattan from the rest of America. And this is really kind of important because for those of us who live on this side, which is generally west of the Hudson, we're sometimes seen as not important. We live in the so-called flyover states, and certainly nothing creative or of importance can come out of any place other than New York or Los Angeles. And that's something that needs to be understood. So I had a meeting once with a gentleman who wanted me to produce a political broadcast for him, and now that I had moved out of Manhattan, he asked where I lived, and I told him in Charleston, South Carolina, and he referenced it as one of those flyover states. Thus, my credibility was immediately diminished. Between the fact of that and he was rude to the servers at the restaurant, I decided that he wasn't really someone I wanted to do business with. But that's just a bit of perspective. So, given the fact that some of us are not living in New York, in Manhattan, or Los Angeles, the question would be, who of you out there considers yourself a genius? So, I can see you. You may not know it, but this kind of is a two-way thing. So go ahead and raise your hands. And that count is generally lower than I would think because everybody in New York thinks they're a freaking genius. It's the one place in the world besides Washington maybe where you can be an absolute failure and you can still be recirculated in a seven-figure salary. So I want to start not by insulting New York or the media, but to kind of set a stage. There is a level of arrogance or narcissism that you need to understand if you want to be successful in pitching and playing in the national media. In a sense, it's like something I read once on crisis management in terms of our relationship as PR people or marketers with the press or media. It's not like we're trying to get them to like us. It's more like we're trying to position ourselves so that they hate us less, so that they see us as being less of the parasite and perhaps more someone who can maybe on occasion contribute. Maybe that's a little bit rough, but I think we need to acknowledge that in this relationship, there is a mutual need. We need them to place our clients, and they need us for content because that is what we supply for them, and that is what we need to think about as being our primary role and need. Their level of daily need is our opportunity. So let me introduce you to the beast, so to speak, the inside. Now, let me take you someplace where few people ever visit. It's the meeting of news executives, the morning meeting. It's where the decisions are made about what is covered that day. In my example or experience, it was a windowless room on West 57th Street, New York. It was behind the set of the CBS Evening News. There was a long conference table set in view of a wall-sized monitor where there were little squares that framed the talking heads of bureau chiefs from across the United States and the world. The executives in New York file in at 10 o'clock in the morning. They sit at the table producers and others fill the seats around the wall. And it's really impressive in a sense, and in another sense it's not. Because at that same time, in about 210 cities across the country, similar gatherings are occurring in newsrooms from New York, which is the number one market, to, say, Glendive, Montana, which is market number 210. And each of these meetings are going to weigh the big stories of the day for their viewing audience. Those stories may range from a destabilized Middle Eastern country that may be on the brink of war and cause ripples and rips in terror assessments and markets across the world, which would be maybe the CBS News story pitch, to, say, in Montana, where there's an increase in oil drilling activity in their shale plays. So after that, after those pitches, comes everything else. And everything else is your target. It encompasses everything from medical to consumer to business to entertainment, human drama, and the ever-present water skiing squirrels or panda stories. Believe me, once in my career I took a stand against an executive producer against panda stories and said that he could fire me before I would put another panda on the air. The knee-jerk cute thing about pandas just drives me crazy. So every broadcast and every day part will have different sectors of interest. But the one thing that's going to hold constant in all of those, it's all about the story. But for a moment, let's go back to the darkened room and the people in suits. By the time the bureau closest to the world's hotspot du jour is finished, the rest are just competing for space in, as you see, this rundown of the broadcast. And that's what it comes down to. It's a fierce competition for a dwindling time in a broadcast. It doesn't matter if it's a half-hour broadcast or 2 hours. Every producer, every reporter is fighting for airtime because getting on the air is how you justify your job. It also notches a win. If you get your story on the air that day, it's good. It means you get to come back tomorrow. It means you get to spike the football. The point of that is to put you inside their heads. The competition is fierce, and it's not always pretty. They are judged by their peers and superiors by every pitch they put forth and every story they bring to the air. You may see what you consider to be mediocre stories on the air, but you're not going to make friends or influence people or have producers pick up your calls or answer your emails by giving them crap content. So before you send your pitch to the press or the media, before your PR team sends out that release, read it, visualize it, and think of yourself standing up in front of that table of critical and criticizing eyes and reading your pitch. It had better be good, because I can tell you when that room turns on you, it's ugly. So what are they looking for? I think we all know content is king. Content marketing is a big word in a big world these days, and it really drives a significant area of our efforts. In my very simple view of the world, of the media world, and this is actually an idea that's shared by Les Moonves, who happens to be the king of CBS, everything's split between two things. There are content providers, and there are the platforms that carry them. The difference these days is that there are a lot more platforms, so there's a greater demand for content, and that's where we come in. All of those producers, all of those executive producers, have to fill a broadcast every day, and it's a tough job. What they need are stories, segments, pitches that bring quality content to their air. So think about it. How many hours a day there are to fill? I mean, it's huge. From the network perspective, there are probably 3.5 hours a day. Cable, 24 hours a day. Web platforms, 24 hours a day. There are tremendous opportunities out there, but on the level of anything other beyond personal blogging, where there is control of content, where there is oversight and overview. It's all about getting the better quality content on their platforms. So think of it this way. Content is the commodity that we're selling or pitching. In terms of a broadcast, content is where is what will either attract or lose viewers. If you lose the viewers, you fail. That's the perspective of every producer and every EP. If the segment doesn't keep the audience, and believe me, the metrics for measurement are minute by minute. I used to read the minute by minutes every morning, looked at every segment that was airing during that period, and would make decisions about whether the story was good and whether the producer was good. And I can tell you the ones who failed to perform did not stick around long. That's how tough it is. So, that's how you determine whether you win or lose. That is where you need to see your pitch. Your pitch ultimately becomes the content that will either draw or lose audience. So it either makes them look good or it makes them look bad. So it's pretty clear our whole focus needs to be towards making it good. Okay, so what is my story? From a producer's perspective, a pitch is nothing, especially if it reads like one. To be successful, your pitch needs to read, smell, look, and taste like a story. So when you think about placement for your client, the company, the product, the book, the whatever, your first question needs to be, what is my story? Everybody has a story. But think of your story as the commodity, again, that you must sell. It needs to be compelling. It needs to be interesting. It needs to be amazing. And it should contain something that the audience on whatever platform can relate to. And that is the very important takeaway. You're probably going to become as sick as I am of that word by the end of this webinar. That's the element that creates the commonality, the link to the other person, the viewer. Usually it's something that either touches them on a personal level or leads them to a change in life or habits that makes things better, that makes their world better. The challenge is to find in your pitch the unique qualities, the elements that tie to the current topicals. Now we'll get to some of those specifics in just a few minutes. What can help make a story? All right, it helps to look at the subject. In this case, it's going to be our clients from a couple of perspectives. One is from the outside, and this is something, if it's a new client, is something that we typically tend to do. You come in as a consultant with a new client, you look at them in their unique perspective, you do your research, you do the due diligence so that you kind of know what's going on with them. And sometimes you look from the inside. You look from their perspective in seeking what helps distill their story. So what you do in looking from both those perspectives is ideally you end up with a string of pitch potentials. And in doing that, different things that you can look at. You examine their business model. What makes it different in terms of entrepreneurs? Entrepreneurs are very big stories, in my opinion, these days. Entrepreneurs are carrying the really unique interests of American business and enterprise. There are so many of them with so many either different ideas, approaches, business models that I just think that they tend to make good stories. Is the product something that competes in a new environment? Or is it, the best new mousetrap ever made? The personalities. CEOs tend to lead and drive vision, and it's always kind of the person that you look at first, whether you're looking at the story from them or whether you're looking at them to tell the story. But also listen to the voices around them. Sometimes there's someone else inside the circle that has a unique perspective that helps break a story out a little bit differently. That is, if the CEO lets other people talk besides himself. And sometimes that's an issue. Community connection. look at the business and their place in the community. There's a lot that's been written and discussed these days about the corporate connection to the community, whether it's the notion of giving back, which I think is a very good ongoing story for any business, to something larger than giving back, the larger notion of John Mackey and conscious capitalism and how businesses structure themselves where giving back or engaging is part of the DNA of the company. There's interest in companies who are motivated by something other than profit. We love profit. I love profit in my business. You love profit in your business. But even though we love capitalism, you can't just keep running around beating that bell. Remember the value in the company's basic story. They may have been around for a while. Maybe they haven't gone back and looked at their original roots. They were once engaged in a business because they were passionate about it. Sometimes a corporation needs to do a breakdown. They need to sit down and rediscuss the origins of their business and what made them passionate about it. And in doing so, sometimes you can find the new stories to help relaunch the company or to help find new pitches. Danny Myers did a really great job with that with his restaurant group in New York, Union Square Hospitality. They sat down about a year ago and completely deconstructed their business model. And from that, they came out with a lot of new ideas, and a lot of those ideas ended up getting into the press and the media. New York Times had a great string of articles about Danny talking about how there's no place in neighborhoods for restaurants anymore because they're being kicked out because of rents. That came through a total deconstruction. And sometimes in that evaluation, what is old to you or what is old to the company is still new to the world outside of them. If it hasn't been reported in a year or so, it's worth looking at to see if there's a fresh spin, a new take, a new way to put it out and to serve it up. Now let's talk about evolving the story. Okay, you want to shoot for the top. Everybody wants to shoot for the top. If you guys are out there listening with me, we've all had clients, your first meeting with a client, you ask them what they want, and they say, I want to be in the New York Times, I want to be on the Today Show, I want to be on GMA, and inwardly you're just going, you smack yourself in the forehead. I'll be honest, it's a long shot. It takes a unique combination of story, pitch, contacts, timing, and luck. And those elements apply to any platform or market. So let's get started. Let's start with the story. When evolving your story, it's kind of like a diamond purchase. You have to consider the 3 C's of clarity, conciseness, and connection. For clarity, it's kind of like focus. The story should have direction and specific touch points that are designed to draw the attention of the reader or the audience. Good stories are simple in their core. It may be about a unique experience that changed your life, that of the business. It may be about the unique observation or need in the community or the world that you're addressing. Or it may simply be drawing attention to a concept that you think people might just pause and go, That's what you're looking for. You're looking for that pause that gets attention. You're looking for that one thing, that one little grabbing, that hook. It's going to make them stop and think for just a moment. Then you've got their attention. Just keep it simple. James Joyce should not be your style guide. Think Hemingway. Concise. This is very important in creating the story as a pitch. It needs to be short. Think of one page, and this is probably something that everyone has heard 1,000 times. Keep the sentences short and evocative. Not to get into a large discussion about the waning length of the human attention span, or particularly the attention span of the media. Nobody wants to read several pages of a pitch. Too long, read later is defining whole platforms in the media, from Yahoo to Twitter And yes, some people are saying now that 140 characters is just too long. Connection. Think of who you're talking to, your core story, the unique element that you want to share. Can be served up several ways. Yes, you hope that some degree of universal appeal exists, that a large number of people will find some form of resonance. But to get it to them, to get it to the bigger stage, you have to confront that tough group of producers and editors who see it first. They're the gateway. And it's the toughest group of skeptics and cynics you're ever going to meet. And I can tell you because I was one of them. So to get past them, what you have to have is a good pitch. Now, before we get to the pitch, here's a pause for an announcement that will be delivered by the fabulous, my colleague, Jen Ash. Hang on.
As you're thinking about your pitch, don't forget to register for a chance to win Inside Media, the online university for entrepreneurs seeking media coverage. All you have to do is put your email address into the Q&A tab at the bottom of the screen. We'll select a winner at random at the end of this webinar and announce them and send you an email afterwards to claim your prize.
Fabulous. Thank you, Jen. So now back to the regularly scheduled program. Let's talk about the pitch. And it really is all about the pitch. The short, critical list of what you need to get media attention includes at least two things: a good story and a good pitch. We've touched on the story. Now the pitch. Okay, so you see this, and this is sexing it up. You know, sex sells. And this is here for a reason, a personal reason, because this has always helped. There's one thing that happened to me once that kind of helped me frame the whole notion of the pitch. I thought I'd seen them all, on the receiving side after about, I don't know, maybe that was maybe 20 years into the business, until I was in the control room one day in the middle of a broadcast, and a young woman walks in a tight T-shirt. She slipped past security and appears in front of me in the middle of the broadcast to pitch a feminine product. Well, she was escorted out. And, years later, I still call that security guy up once in a while and let him have it just for that breach. The point is, the pitch is the point where you either open a door of opportunity or close one. So you need to think about it carefully in how you frame it, especially if you're going for some crazy gimmick to frame your pitch. Because once it's out there, you can't get it back. And whatever you're sitting around in a meeting and sounds like a really great idea, you need to think about the receiving end and who it may either appeal to or offend. So I'm going to share a few ways to make it work and a few ways to kill your pitch. 3 ways to make it work. And I think these should not startle anyone, but they're from the other side. There are some real reasons here that this is a little bit different. Follow the news cycles. Look for events and larger stories that you can become a part of, where your story, company, product, message happens to connect. There's always good interest in economic stories, even when times are bad. And believe me, even though in the last few years it seems like that it's all breaking news all the time and wars breaking out somewhere, or for heaven's sake, we're all going to die from Ebola, there are cycles and periods where certain stories keep coming back around. There are seasons for stories. There is a seasonality. There is a reason for calendars and a notion of pitch calendars, although I'm going to bust a couple notions about that in a couple of minutes. So, while the same stories may get circulated, on a somewhat regular basis, part of your task is to look at, even if you're going to be competing against the same pitches for the same kinds of things, the uniqueness of your story and pitch that's going to make it stand out differently. And that's where you play your advantage. You should research every platform to see what stories are trending and build your pitch to help determine the time of placement. If you your story or your idea is already being done, if someone beats you to it, you either need to find another angle or consider pitching to an alternative platform. If you see it on one network, pitch to the other network. Play one against the other. It might be that you get that placement. If you play it smart, you may actually end up beating your competitor. If the story is building as a trend, you need to find a way to tap into that trend and pitch yourself as related or an expert in the field. So here are a few facts from news people on the receiving side of pitches. What makes the pitches more appealing? What makes them ultimately more accepted and used? 39% said exclusive research. And this is something that I've found has been very, very important to me. And frankly, I have sought and taken clients because they do their own original research. It provides specific information that is directly related to their space that you can use to leverage in a pitch. And that is very, very important because that's what reporters want. They want information that is real and genuine because that's the content you're providing them. They don't have to go out and do it if you're giving them, here's research, here's something that has meaning. That's a huge incentive for a pickup. 27% said breaking news. There are often pitches that relate to a breaking story. It can be about a client that has some specific knowledge in that field or story. It can be about a direct link to the story that's going on at the moment. If you can connect to that breaking and evolving story, you have a good chance of landing. Caution here, that I'll go on a little bit about later, don't capitalize on it. We'll talk about that in just a couple of minutes. 15% said emotional stories. Okay, emotional stories was not always, look, I'm the guy that didn't like pandas, so maybe emotional stories didn't play that well for me. It involves some close scrutiny between whether you're offering useful information or content or trying to capitalize on something. Emotional stories can be good or bad. Sticking with the good, there's no downside to sharing a heartwarming story if you can work it into your pitch. It's always one of the first things to look for in your clients, how they engage in the community, something that helps build goodwill, for the good of Americans. I mean, we all like to have something to be left at the end of a broadcast, or something that makes us feel good. And in the construction of broadcasts, over the many years that I did that, it's all, a fluid process. But ideally, at the end of the broadcast, you look for something that leaves your audience feeling good. Sending them away feeling negative is not a great way to leave them hanging. So, why does this matter? Let's get back to the takeaway. The story has to have value to the audience. This takeaway thing is a phrase I grew to hate in editorial meetings because it's the first thing that comes out of the producer's mouth. What's the takeaway? As a concept, it's important to the viewer. As a phrase, I had it banned from my meetings because I was sick of hearing it. It's very much the same as the one that preceded it, which is news you can use. I think Larry Magid was the one, maybe Larry Magid, I can't recall, who came up with that. It's all the same. People want information. They want stories that make their lives easier, better, improved, sexier. They need something to take away. So anytime someone's watching the news or reading an article, they need a takeaway. What can they get from learning about this? Will they find a shortcut in their business or their lives? Are they going to be wowed by the advances in technology and their potential uses? Is there a personal lesson to be learned or shared? The list is endless, but it's something that you should evaluate every pitch in terms of what is the takeaway. So that's the question you need to ask yourself at every pitch meeting is about this story is what is the takeaway? Okay, other ways to make it work. And this is rather important. Make it easy. People are lazy. Maybe that's maybe that's not positive. Let's frame it. Sometimes the path of least resistance is a more appealing path. If you make your story, your pitch, your event difficult to cover, why is the media going to go out of their way to create the extra effort just for you? Because, don't mean to sound cruel here, but you're really not that special in their eyes. So think like a producer. Think of the elements, the video, the interviews. Give them everything they need so they don't have to put extra effort into tracking it down. Make your press release read like a story. I mean, you would be amazed, and I am still amazed. And actually, if I were on the other side when I was an executive producer or senior producer, if I found people pulling direct words out of press releases, I would fire them. But you would be amazed how many times you'll hear the words you write in your release coming out of a reporter or an anchor's mouth. That's the sign. That's the sign of how important it is to write your release in a way that is usable. Make it accurate. Do your research, because they don't want to. Use facts and sources so that they'll feel comfortable with the information that you're providing. Consider the time of day and which day part has the most promise, either for your event or your pitch, because some times of day are better for the news cycle to be covered. Some times of day are going to be impossible, and you're not going to make air. It has the same thing to do with pitching. If you're pitching a reporter or a producer who's on a deadline, on or about those deadline times, you're just going to piss them off, and it's not going to be helpful. Consider the location. If what you're pitching is an event, if they have to drive a long distance, they're very unlikely to come. Make it close, make it convenient, make everything nice and tidy, convenient with sources of things that they may or may not need. All right, those were the positives. Well, let's look at 3 ways to kill your pitch. And this is, I feel pretty comfortable with going negative. It's kind of like it's making it real. Producers and editors, or the occasional executive who happens to pick up a pitch letter, let's be honest, they have not spent their entire lives waiting for the moment that your email or letter lands in front of them. They lead incredibly packed days under pressure, and if your pitch even makes it that far, it better be good. There's not this rosy-eyed optimism. They're not seeking opportunity. They're looking for a good story because they're looking for the content that's going to make them look good. They're looking for something that they can put on the air that is going to get audience, make them look good, so that their boss is happy with them. From a real perspective, in most cases, unless it's coming from someone that they know as a trusted source that they have a relationship with, the prevailing thought is, this is going to suck. I'm sorry. But, when you get a blind release, that's what the prevailing thing is. So the weight, the responsibility is on you to make it good. So here are a few ways to stay out of the trash. You've got 5 seconds. That's the reality. Seriously, you've got about 5 seconds. Whatever they see first has got to get their attention. If the pitch is in the form of a press release, that headline and subhead need to be compelling, topical, and promise of something good to come. If you're leading with a personal letter, the opening paragraph better hit it hard and high. And we'll get at some specifics about writing in just a minute. But because writing is still the fundamental and critical part of what we do. It's the divide between being booked for air or tossed in the bin. So the number one way to kill your pitch is to write a complex, unnatural release. Don't fake it. First impressions count. If it looks like spam and it reads like spam, you're not going to pass the 5-second test. So many people use the easy tools of the media these days to put their message out. My recommendation is to avoid or to be very aware of the use of mass email tools. If you're pitching via mass email or constant contact or one of these things, honestly, you're dead. I still get some of these from businesses that buy lists of media executives and sell them to people who want to pitch to media executives, and it's not impressive. A lot of the companies just don't do it well. That in general is in general. If you're taking the lazy way of putting it out there, mass email tools can be useful, but you have to be very aware of how you're using them. If you have high-value targets, you should approach them personally. And that's, to be perfectly honest, with Vocus here as a sponsor, Vocus is one of the few companies that actually gets it right in many ways. So I give them their credits for their functionalities. But don't fall on the functionality as your sole responsibility. Don't use the mass email tools and say, I've done everything that I need to do. You should avoid lame, broad openings. The same lame opening attempting to be personal is so impersonal. There are a lot of high-dollar PR firms that use email tools to be personal, where the first name gets dropped in, and you've got the form opening. Let me put it to you this way. When I received emails or pitches, if the first line is, hey, Batt, I hope you had a great weekend, you're dead. Absolutely, because that is someone who's just spamming. Don't try to impress anyone with your intelligence. Sometimes trying to override a pitch or release using insider jargon, big dollar words, complex sentences, as a lot of releases read, that'll get you tossed quicker than a basketball on a shot clock. I cannot tell you how many times I've read releases that just make my eyes cross with boredom. Timing, it's everything. We talked about watching trends for your advantage. Also be aware of news cycles and when not to approach. Be sensitive to major breaking stories that involve tragedy or loss. You might have a whole campaign geared for release on a particular day. Look first before launching. Pre-scheduled releases should not be forgotten. You should always check on them. I actually received pitches on September 11, 2001, pre-scheduled releases, and in subsequent years. And as a perspective from the other side, I was getting ready to send out a round of pitches for a client targeting some of the primary Northeast and network media. Then took a break before I shot them out to take a run through a few bookmarked news sites I look at. And I saw that the Boston Marathon bombing had just occurred. And, of course, the media was in full coverage. Guess where my pitches would have gone if I'd shot them out that day? In the trash. And, frankly, if I'd made that mistake with people that I have a lifetime of confidence in, it would take a little while to rebuild that. Because, if you're not paying attention to that, you're really not in the game. It's worth paying attention to what's going on in the world, because at best you'd look foolish trying to place a story, and at worst it's like you're attempting to take advantage of a bad situation for your own gain. Trying to capitalize on tragedy, believe me, and some try this, in my opinion, is the worst of bottom-feeding PR, and personally I'll have nothing to do with it. Sometimes in our position as PR professionals, you have to be the one to advise and guide your clients. For example, I had a client who was in the bottled water business. And after one of the major tornadoes in the Midwest, we were sitting in a conference room, and one of the executives said, let's send a truckload of water to Oklahoma. And another one said, and let's have our logo big and bold on both sides of the truck. And then another one said, and Batt, you make sure that you get us some TV coverage out there. And I said, no. And then I explained to them why it was not a good idea. Send the water, let your actions speak for themselves. Reporters and deadlines. One other thing about timing. Reporters and producers live on deadlines. We all have some form of deadline in our lives, but believe me, I still have nightmares about being a minute to air and without scripts or missing the lead story. Depending on the medium, the platform, consider when the reporter's deadline might be, and don't call or pitch too close to it because it really pisses them off. So, writing your press release. There's an old guy named Dan Rather that used to say, we're all just telling stories here. He also held good writing as one of the key elements of reporting, and most good journalists still do. So when you're pitching to journalists, the writing needs to be good. A press release by whatever name is still a primary means of messaging. Untold millions go out every day from departments dedicated to cranking the word out, often paying little attention to who's paying attention, and frequently it's no one. So the press release has to have a short list of objectives. It needs to be received, it needs to be read, and the message needs to do something. It needs to go from the release to inclusion in someone's reporting. It needs to go directly to a blog posting. It needs to create a contact. It needs to land an interview, or it needs to raise an eyebrow. Any of those results will be considered positive. Most often, press releases are simply deleted or go straight to spam. And there are two main reasons your release may end up in the virtual trash. One is channel, which is how it's received, and the other is the message. From experience, if the headline and first paragraph are weak or dull, the rest is just irrelevant. The message must be strong and engaging. Now, we're going to do a little role-playing here, because I like to do this. Let me ask you a couple of questions. Do you ever read the press releases out loud? Do you read the quotes that you write for the CEOs? And I'm just going to hear, this is from a famous beverage manufacturer. Oh, my God. There's their name right there in the lead. So I'm going to read this. San Antonio. Mayor Julian Castro joined Coca-Cola to unveil a substantial next step in the SA 2020 health and fitness goals, totaling $1.5 million. Grants from the Coca-Cola Foundation and San Antonio Sports and San Antonio Food Bank will expand mobilizing health and fitness resources to neighborhoods project. The program intends to increase physical activity by marshaling wellness resources to neighborhoods through multiple initiatives. I mean, really, my eyes cross. I know that some companies have reason and purpose in doing this, but you really have to consider, who's listening, who's reading. So, writing a good release. When did communication become so convoluted? Some say it's all about SEO value. Well, maybe not. Even if you're going for SEO value, who you're really looking to attract, computers or people? There are legions of PR people who think that they have the science of a good release nailed down. From personal experience, from a media perspective, most of them go in the trash. So here are a few tips for a release that somebody might read. Make it interesting, either a pitch or a press release. If you don't grab the reader by the first line, the rest doesn't matter. Avoid inside industry language, because unless you're approaching a trade group, don't fall into the trite language that insiders tend to use. For example, one of my personal most hated phrases right now is best practices. Keep it short. This isn't a novel. If you can't sell it in one page, 2 or 3 is not going to make it any better. Tight sentences. What's the value? To get attention, your approach should offer or suggest something of value to the recipient. As we've mentioned, a takeaway. So, that, I think, is bringing us up to the time here when we're going to start looking at some questions. What I'm just going to mention right now, if you want to learn more, you can go to InsideMediaPro.com for more extensive access to the tips and more. Inside Media is an online university for entrepreneurs seeking media coverage. And now the exciting moment, Jen is handing me the winner in today's contest for access to the full Inside Media Pro package is Bob Sharilla, and I hope I got that right. Bob, thank you so much. Thank everyone for listening, and now we're going to look for some questions.
Batt, thank you. That was a great presentation. Before we do pop into the questions, we're going to launch a quick survey that we have. Everybody, your feedback is really important to us. It helps us determine not only topics for future webinars, but also how can we improve them going forward. So we'd love it if you could fill this out while you're still listening. And just as a reminder, you can ask questions through that Q&A panel inside your webinar console. So first question, Batt, we have a lot of folks on the webinar today who are in an industry that perhaps isn't considered mainstream. What's the best way for them to make their content relevant to a mainstream type of audience?
Well, if you want to go from, let's talk, what is not considered mainstream to getting mainstream coverage or access, again, I'm going to go back to saying it's all about looking and developing a story. I mean, I've had a lot of clients, and I tend to seek clients that are smaller, tech startups and things of that sort, simply because usually they have very exciting stories. I had one who was working in big data, and the first time I sat and had a meeting with him, he was talking about things that both made my head spin and my eyes cross because I felt so stupid that I didn't understand things about prescriptive analytics and things of that sort. But the more I listened to him and the more I did research and read about it, granted, big data in some form or another has been a big topic, in the media for the last several years. But it, for a lot, it was really kind of insider platform stuff. But for him, it was about looking for particular parts of what he does or what the company does, and try to find areas of interest that would make it mainstream. In his case, he was doing some research in oil and gas exploration that would help, make us more energy independent. Look for the larger themes that you can attach to and try to find a way to bridge those two things. So, look for the big topics and find a way to get yourself in there. I hope that's a useful answer.
Yeah, that's great. And when you have a story that you think is a great fit, but maybe you're unknown to that producer, or that reporter, or that editor, what's the best way to establish that first relationship?
Well, I think, and this is kind of funny because I was reading not too long ago, and this is my own experience too. I think the critical thing in that first relationship, and this might sound a little mean or a little reverse, the most critical thing is not to screw it up. The most critical thing is not to make your first contact, your first high-value contact, on a bad pitch. I think you need to, if you're really trying to play it up, you need to maybe wait sometimes for a story that you actually think you can land before you really try to hit, the larger levels. Because if you're trying to play it up and you make that contact with that reporter, that producer, the person at the level that you really want, and you give them something that isn't really good, you're pretty much dead from there on out. There are any number of stories, and even personal stories of producers I've had that have had initial contacts from people that gave something good that ended up getting, that person who made that pitch, the next pitch was easier. So the important thing to think about is that first pitch and making it successful if you want repeat business. Honestly, and it sounds tough, sometimes the best advice is waiting. Sometimes it's best to, if it's with a client that you want to play up, sometimes clients will push things that they think are the absolute best ideas. Really evaluate the idea. You need to be pretty confident that it has real value to pitch it before you do, so that you don't create that negative situation from the beginning.
And what if I pitch a reporter but I don't hear back? Should I follow up? What's the best rule of thumb or time or whatnot?
The follow-up, that's a tough one. I think, honestly, it plays two ways. because I've been in that very same situation. I think that you can, make one contact, recontact, maybe two. I think if you go beyond that, then sometimes you just have to read the writing on the wall. If your first follow up to them, hey, just following up on that contact, I sent you that idea. Does it have any real use to you? Anything else I can tell you? That's fine. After that, I think you pretty much just have to accept it. I would say that continually going back and back and back, bad idea.
And what about pitching on social media?
Social media is fine. I mean, it's everything is open. Every platform is an opportunity. We all know that some stories, can get their own life on social media and just kind of explode. It's not generally what I would think is the most successful means of landing a pitch in mainstream media. But you have to play every asset you've got. And they're all different. You have to think of every platform just like you would think of every reporter, producer. You have to do your research to find out what is different about that platform and how it may work specifically for that pitch, just like you do for each reporter or producer that you're looking at. If you're sending the same pitch to every person, every platform, that's not the way to make it successful. You have to tailor them all. You have to do the extra work. You have to use the tools that are out there. I mean, tools that are provided by Vocus, tools that are provided by, Facebook or other social platforms. You have to be aware that, every pitch, each pitch doesn't play everywhere the same. So you have to tailor them.
I find a lot of reporters have a sort of pitch horror story. You actually shared yours with us earlier. Do you also have one that sort of sticks out in your mind as the best pitch you ever received? And what was so great about it?
Wow, the best pitch I ever received. Oh my, that's a tough one. It was not the girl in the T-shirt. I can't say that there is one at the moment that really jumps out. I can tell you that if you look at specific areas, fields, topicals, let's for example take millennials and how they're contributing to the buying market, the cycle of everything. Millennials are really big. There was a guy who was big in millennials. He was a consultant. He was an advisor. He got in touch with one of my producers, and by his energy and by his knowledge, and a lot of it was by the research and data that he had self-generated, he was one of the better pitches ever because he did one segment for us on the early show, and I flew him up to New York and interviewed with him, and I used him as a regular contributor after that. And a lot of that had to do with energy, passion, and data.
That's great. And I think we have time for maybe one more question. We had a lot of folks write in a little concerned about how you said don't start an email with, "Hi, how was your weekend?" What is the right way to start that email to get people's attention?
I think if you look for a formulaic first line, I'm going to tell you there is not one. What I would tell you is that if you do as I was suggesting, if you research the reporter that you're going to specifically, if you research the producer and some recent work they do your background, do your homework, and know about them. Because if you go to them and say, "Hey, I saw the piece that you wrote on thus and such, you had some great points on this and that. I think that we can help by adding this and this." And so I would say that probably the best opening line is a personal connection to something that they've done well, so that you're reinforcing their work, let's say it, their ego, and the fact that you've taken the time to find out something about them, which to me on the receiving end would mean that you're probably less likely to feed me a bunch of crap. Can I say that?
Absolutely. Unfortunately, it looks like we're already at the top of the hour. I'd like to thank everybody for attending today. You can find an archive of our webinars on our website. That's vocus.com. And we've also got some great research and slides from past webinars that you can find on SlideShare. That's slideshare.com/Vocus. And of course, we're always on Facebook and Twitter. As a reminder, we're Vocus. We're a leading provider of cloud-based public relations and marketing software, and we're the parent company of online services PR Web, Help a Reporter Out, and iContact. Batt, thanks again for joining us. This has been really great.
Thank you so much. I've enjoyed it tremendously. Good luck, everyone. I'd love to hear from you.